So welcome everybody. I get the awesome pleasure of inviting our speakers up tonight. So tonight we have Paul Chebator and Mer Zovko, who have worked in the Office of Student Affairs collectively for almost 60 years. They met working here at BC and were married in 1997. Paul came to Boston College 34 years ago as an assistant dean. He later became an associate dean and served 2 stints as acting dean of students in the last 15 years before being appointed to the position permanently. For the last 10 years, he has taught a section of Courage to Know, and he also started the Sexual Assault Network, which is now run by the Women's Resource Center. Mer Zovko received her graduate degree in counseling from Boston University before coming to Boston College 23 years ago. She is an assistant director in the Office of Student Programs, and among lots of other duties, is responsible for the Emerging Leaders Program and Student Leadership Awards. Paul and Mer's interactions and mentorship with students is legendary. Paul and Mer will both be retiring at the end of this academic year and plan on spending next fall in Italy. So please help me in welcoming up the dynamic duo.
Wow. I just need to take a minute to just look and say hello to all of you, and thank you so much for coming out tonight. This is so exciting for Paul and I to have you join us on this evening when our title for this presentation is called Relationships, Community, and Trust. Okay, relationships, community, trust. We could be here for through the weekend talking to you about relationships, community, and trust. And we thought, where do we really want to begin? We didn't know where to begin. And we were sitting at the computer this weekend and we said, okay, where should we begin? And both of us, and I think this says something about our sense of humor, both of us looked at each other and said, Google. Everybody begins on Google. So I typed in questions about relationships. And very quickly, both of us realized that there would not be sort of the secret to the starting point there, because there were hundreds of questions that came up when you Google that. So Paul and I sat down together and we thought, we just need to begin at the beginning. We need to do a little bit of conversation about Mer and Paul, pre-Mer and Paul, Paul and Mer currently, and a little bit about our faith journeys as well, because I think that instead of having 3 separate topics, for us they're really all bound up into one. And so that is going to be, that's a little bit of an intro, I think, about our presentation.
What we're going to do is ask you, as you listen to our story, to kind of look through it through your own personal lens. Each of you is the sum total of all of your experiences up to this point in your life. Some of you are relatively young and haven't had as many experiences. Some of us that have been around for a little bit longer. But nevertheless, you've been experiencing different things about relationship all your life. How have you begun to develop and grow your own understanding of what it means to be in a relationship? How have you developed skills around relationships? Now, some people are really fortunate that they've had wonderful role models growing up as to what a good, healthy relationship is. Others, like the 2 of us, not so much. Mer grew up in a family with alcoholism as a major focus of the situation. I grew up as an only child. My mom died when I was 10, and I quickly became estranged from my father and the rest of the family, so it was a very different kind of situation. But nevertheless, what we're going to ask you to do is, as we talk, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we've learned and what's worked for us, and try to put it in your own framework so that it's something you can incorporate as you move forward.
Section 1. Pre-Mer and Paul.
There will be a quiz.
There will be a quiz. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my life before I met Paul in terms of relationships. And I was never one, I never really liked to date, like date one person one week, date another person the other week. That kind of wasn't me. And so I tended to be in long-term relationships. So I was in the first real relationship where I would say I truly loved someone for 8 years. Then I was in another relationship that was very, very special to me and very important for 4 years. Then I was in another relationship for 8 years. And in all truthfulness, I was sort of in smaller relationships outside of those relationships, depending on how well or how not so well the major relationships were going. So, the person that I began to date prior to my relationship with Paul, I met him back when I was 25, fell in love, heavy fell in love, and about a year later, we moved in together, and we talked about marriage, and we went down to the jewelry shop, and we looked at engagement rings, and we designed my engagement ring, and then we bought my engagement ring. And you would think that the next thing I'm going to say is that we then put the ring on my finger, but we didn't, because even though I had this beautiful engagement ring, and even though this man that I was in this relationship with was a really genuinely wonderful person, I really felt that there was something amiss, and that wasn't really where I was. And I didn't know how to explain it at that time, but what I did was, what we did together, which was really painful, was we put my engagement ring in a drawer. God, that sounds really bad when I think about that, but that's what we did. We put it in the drawer. And I think, I was talking with Paul about this, and there were two things that really jumped out at me that kind of said to me, this isn't the place that you need to be. One of those things was that we were in different parts of our career. So I kind of had a pretty decent career. I was working at Boston University in the counseling center, and Michael was just getting started. And he was a musician, and so he was getting started. He sort of decided to have music as his secondary career, but he was going to be looking in other directions. But for me, he was working, and I felt like I was just there kind of hanging out. And it's not where I wanted to be. I kind of wanted to be with him. And so I don't know if any of you have seen the movie. It came out a really long time ago, so maybe your parents, hopefully not your grandparents, but maybe your parents told you about this movie. It was called Defending Your Life. It was starring Meryl Streep, who you all know, Albert Brooks, who maybe some of you know, and then a cast of characters that you don't know. But basically, the movie was about people who died, people who went to heaven, and then once they got to heaven, they had a chair that was in front of a TV, and they put in the videotape of their life, and they got to watch their life in a very objective, kind of removed way to see, well, what did your life look like? And you don't usually have a chance to do that, or so you think, when you're here on earth. So I saw this movie and I thought, okay, so if I die and I'm up there with God watching my video of my life, here's what it's going to show me. It's going to show me sitting in my living room saying, wow, I wonder if this is going to be the night that Michael's going to come home and we can have dinner together. And then it'll show me like going to bed late and all alone. Then it will show me a time when I was sitting there saying, well, gee, will this be the time that he'll come home early and we'll be able to have a really great conversation? No. And so I was waiting, and I was waiting, and I was waiting. And I think I was waiting literally, but I think I was also waiting figuratively. So that was one example. And then quickly another example is that for those of you who know me, I'm a pretty passionate, enthusiastic person who can get excited by really little things in life, like coming upon a dog, walking down the street. It's my day. It makes my day. I get down, I pet the dog kisses me on the face. I love it. And
meanwhile, the owner's tugging the dog to get away from this crazy lady.
That's right. These things happen. But nevertheless, so I don't know what moment I was having about an exciting thing that happened in my day, but I was conveying this to him one day, and he looked at me, and he had this really negative expression on his face. And I couldn't read it, and I just kind of said, what's the matter? And he looked at me, and in a really, don't know how I'd describe it, but a very just unpleasant way. He looked at me and he said, you are so enthusiastic. But it was really said in like an ouch way, because I just stood there and I remember thinking, oh my God, like, yeah, that is me. That is so me at my core. And you clearly do not like that. And that was a real aha moment for me. So those were kind of my thunderbolts, I guess, of that. And I didn't know what I wanted to do when I realized this. I thought, do I want to get married? Do I want to get married to this person who I love? I know I love him, but I'm really not clear about what's going on and my feelings about this. And I feel, there were times I think during that time of my life where I would say, okay, so I have really great friends and I have a really great job and I don't need to be married. I can just go life solo. It's okay. But I think I could say that on the outside, but deep in my soul, I was thinking, am I really ever going to find this forever person for me? So
my story. Unlike Mer, I was really only in one serious long-term relationship before we met. I was 19, she was 18. We met in college. This was in the 60s, the late 60s, when things were a little bit crazy. The old story, if you can remember the 60s, you weren't really there. But it was interesting. We were both struggling with our identities. We were two lonely, shy, individuals who kind of found one another. And we began to rely on one another, and we became companions and developed companionship that eventually became what was a loving relationship. Towards the end of college, we moved in together. When we graduated, we came back to Boston, lived together with some other friends. And, in that period of time, from the time we were 18 and 19 to the time we were 21 and 22, there was just an assumption, I think, by everyone that we would get married. Our friends just kind of assumed that. I was estranged from my family, but her family assumed that her father would introduce me as his son-in-law before we had even talked about getting married. So there was clearly an expectation, and as I look back on it, I'm not sure that we ever had that conversation. Other people did, but I'm not sure we ever did. Fast forward, and then eventually, when I was 23, she was 22, we got married. We can fast forward now by about 13 years. Fall of 1987, I'm working at Boston College. I came down with some kind of mysterious illness that it took them a long time to figure out, but to make a long story short, I was in intensive care and near death for about a week, and then spent a little over 2 months in the hospital afterwards, pulled through. Mer mentioned that movie, Defending Your Life. Well, that experience for me in the hospital was very much that experience of sitting there and looking back at my life up to that point. It was a period of reflection for me, a period of really a time to contemplate what had been going on. And I began to look and realize that there had been some real disquieting dissatisfaction in my life prior to that I began to understand more clearly was about the kind of life I wanted to live and the kind of relationship that I wanted to be in. In other words, who I was and what was I missing. I felt that there was an emptiness, a lack of communication. I think we eventually, because we had met so young, I think we grew together, but in somewhat different ways. So I think we had different priorities. I distinctly recall a lack of what our good friend Father Michael Himes talks about as joy in a relationship. And I also didn't feel I was an equal partner in that relationship. That was really scary for me, and obviously very difficult for the two of us. We tried talking it out. We went to couples counseling extensively, spent a lot of money on that. And it eventually came to the point where we realized that this just wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to be the way, particularly me, I can't speak for her, but particularly I was ready to live the rest of my life. So we decided, at that point to separate. At that point, even though I was working at BC, and I did have my BC community, I was really alone. I had no siblings, no family to speak of. Clearly, I had friends. But it was that point in my life where I was probably the deepest. It was the hardest decision I ever made. It was the most difficult time of my life. But it was also the time where I realized that I did have some kind of inner strength, and I could reach down to my core and find this sense that I at the time called faith, but with a small f. And an interesting story about that, because I defined it as faith with a small f. And a number of years later, 4 or 5 years later, I had the occasion to be talking to one of our Jesuits and relating that story to him. And he said, "Why do you think that's faith with a small f?" He said, "That's, in my opinion, faith with a capital F." So maintaining that sense of balance and perspective that I was able to do, being able to walk forward and move along, I really began to understand afterwards, certainly, that faith was God working with me and helping me through this period, walking with me as I moved forward, helping heal and helping me really feel that I could make amends for ending that relationship. And it really did help me get beyond that to the other side.
And so this other side for me began when I got here to Boston College in 1989. I was offered the job, and I had been working down at BU. And I thought this was such a great opportunity to come to Boston College. But then all of a sudden I had this moment where everything I had repressed all of a sudden came back up and just sucker punched me in the stomach. And all that stuff that I just mentioned was Catholicism. So, a little bit of my background. I grew up in Pennsylvania in the 60s, in the early 60s, and went to a Catholic grade school. That's where it all started. If I was laying on a psychologist's bed right now, I would say that's where it all started. I was left-handed, and for those of you who have heard your parents' stories, I see people nodding already. You heard they're true. I'm validating your mother and your father's experience because, yes, I was left-handed. Yes, they took the metal edge of the ruler and whacked me in my left hand every time that I used a pencil. And I became very adept at learning how to survive. And learning how to survive became not listening to what they said. So I thought that I knew what God was, but everything that they were showing me was very confusing to me, and it seemed like it was what God wasn't. So I said, okay, clearly I'm like 9, you're a lot older, I'm wrong, you're right. And I just thought, I'll repress this. That's the easiest way to do it. Press the pause button, or maybe the delete button is actually more appropriate. Press the delete button, fast forward to 1989. Oop, got to go back for just 1 second. Because the pastor of my church, where I grew up and where I went to school, still to this day, when I think of this man, I can only define him in one way. Maybe forgiveness will come up for me someday, but until it does, the only way I can imagine this man in my mind's eye is to say that if there is a hell, and if there is a Lucifer, and if there is fire and coal, he is Lucifer's right-hand man. He was evil, he said terrible things, and he was so destructive to my parish. But I knew it, but you know, how do you verbalize that as a 5th grader? And so I came to Boston College. After about 24 hours of struggling after I was offered the job, I arrived. And about 2 months later, I was with my colleagues in the Student Affairs office, and we had the opportunity to go to Manresa House and to sit and have this lovely conversation with, at that time, the rector of the Jesuits, whose name was Father Bill Barry. Amazing man. I didn't know it at the time, but an amazing man. So he's sitting there and he's telling us about Ignatius and how he fought the battles and how he got wounded and how he was laid up for a while, and God this and blah, 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 and God that, and blah, 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 and God, God, God. And I sat there and I was so completely stressed out. My palms were sweating. I just was tense. And he asked, he said, does anyone have any questions? And I just thought to myself, stuff it, Mayor, just sit on your hands, don't say a word. And then he continued on, and finally I just couldn't not say something. And so I raised my hand politely, he called on me, and I looked at him and I said, can you please, I said, I have to tell you, I'm getting a lot of anxiety because you're saying the word God so much, and I'm wondering if you could call it a different name, because I am really having a hard time sitting here. And as soon as it came out of my mouth, I thought, way to get yourself fired. So 2 months and 2 days into being here, maybe 3 by the time they run the papers down and then have them signed by the Director of Human Resources, I will be fired. And what I didn't realize, but I came to realize very quickly, was that it was one of those moments, those 2 paths diverge in a woods. Well, I thought I was on the one to hell to meet up with that other pastor, and I was not, because Father Bill Barry looked at me and with the most gentle eyes said to me, you know, I never really cared much for that name either. He said, you know, it's just not what I imagine when I imagine this being. He said, really, to me, I think it should be called the mystery. How are you with that name? And then after I did this, I shut my mouth because I was so taken aback. I nodded. He continued on as if nothing had happened. And for me, I continued on, never, ever, ever again having an issue with the word God. So that was a faith moment, a gigantic leap of faith in my life.
And interestingly enough, Father Barry, Bill Barry, is the same Jesuit that helped me convert that faith with the small f to the faith with the capital F. So he's been very important in our lives and is still out at Weston, I believe, the Jesuits. So we're going to now talk a little bit more about our lives here at BC. I came to BC, as someone said, in 1980. Mir came in 1989. We both happened to be working in the same office when Mir came on board. And our boss at the time, Bob Sherwood, asked me to work with Mir on this relatively new project called the Emerging Leader Program. I knew that would get it. ELP was in its real infancy at that point in time, and Mir and I worked together to help it grow. So we began our knowledge of one another as colleagues. We worked together as colleagues. And in that colleagueship soon turned into a friendship. We were comfortable with one another. We felt, like we could trust one another in our work. And so the friendship became a very good friendship. At some point or other, that friendship got to a point where I think we both, without saying anything to each other, got pretty scared, because it was clear that this friendship had become something much more serious. At that time, Mir was still with her boyfriend, and I had been separated but not divorced. I found Mir to be unlike, and those of you who know her, unlike anyone I'd ever met before. and I mean that in a good way, exclusively in a good way. But it was a true revelation. And I was at that point struggling. I still had a lot of guilt, but I also had this wonder of what are the possibilities of this relationship. And it was clear to me that Mir really appreciated the things in me that I valued as well. My strength, my centeredness, my sometimes quirky sense of humor, and also that we understood and shared kind of a common vision about what a relationship should be, and kind of began to grow and develop from there.
For me, when I realized that this was something serious, I actually remember, I think I just have these moments where lightning strikes me. I think you're a little more, come to it. I'm like a boom. And it was a boom as our offices were in McElroy on the first floor. I was walking up to the second floor to the faculty dining room, and I sat in that stairwell. And nobody else was there. I sat down on a stair. I put my head on my head, and I just said, "Oh my God, I think that I really care about this man." And it was like a 9 on the Richter scale in terms of earthquakes. For me, it was an internal earthquake. I knew I had a choice to make, and the choice could mean change. And I'm not a change person. Like, I'm really good with not changing. If something's not totally broken, just leave it alone. It can be a little broken, but if it's not totally broken. And for me, it was this moment where I had to decide, am I going to stay in this relationship with this man that I really do love, but it's like putting, square pegs in round holes, so to speak? Or am I going to make a decision and say what it was I wanted in a relationship? Because finally, I saw it. I saw it happening. This was what I wanted in a relationship. I saw that Paul enjoyed spending time with me. There wasn't any wait. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think...
You're never wrong, dear.
No, don't. He's right. No, that's so not. If you knew the two of us, you would know that that's so not true.
We'll get to that.
But honestly, I really think that if you had had tickets to a playoff game or something like that, he would have said, or this was the feeling he gave me at least, that he would say, no, I don't need those tickets to the playoff game because Mir and I are going to hang out and play cribbage tonight. It was that... Okay, I'm not going to look this way. It was just that sense of care. It was this ease. So all my life, I witnessed struggle. I witnessed drama. My life, my parents, my relatives, my friends. I just knew so many people who were divorced. There was so much drama, and I think I equated relationships with drama. This didn't have a lot of drama in it. It was calm, it was fun, he appreciated me, he seemed to actually really embrace my sense of enthusiasm, and this deep sense of joy that I hold for life. I felt that he really, I think it really resonated with him. And it was, whereas the previous person, it wasn't accepted, for Paul it felt like the stamp of approval. So
we were recently talking to a very dear friend of ours, Paula, who was telling us a story about her Aunt Margaret. Now, Margaret, God rest her soul, passed away 10 years ago. But Paula comes from a very large family, about 6 or 7 children. And any time any of her brothers and sisters or Paula herself would talk to Aunt Margaret about a new beau in their lives, Aunt Margaret always asked them 3 questions. Number 1, are they easy to be with? Number 2, do they make you smile? And number 3, do you laugh a lot together?
And what Paul and I realized is that those were exactly the qualities that brought us together to the starting line of our relationship. Did he make me smile? Check. Did we laugh a lot together? Double check. Is he easy to be with? Check. Check. Everything was a check mark. And it was a remarkable way to begin a relationship with all of these positive check marks. And when we thought about Aunt Margaret, and we thought, geez, she really was ahead of her time. Google didn't exist back when Aunt Margaret was alive, but she nailed those questions. And she also probably would have said these other few questions that were also listed on Google, and Paul looked at these hundreds of questions. We both looked at these hundreds of questions that we pulled up, and we thought, what really resonated with the two of us? And we found 3 other questions that we thought we'd talk with you about tonight. And those questions are, does my partner accept me for who I am? Do they inspire me to be the best version of who I can be? And do they bring joy to my life?
The first question, does my partner accept me for who I am? Those of you who know us know that we are really very, very different in a number of ways. Not every way, but in a number of ways. And it's clear, and I think everyone knows, that opposites tend to attract. And that was the case for us. Opposites do attract. And for the first 3 to 6 months, it's really exciting to be with someone who has really different ways of doing things, different perspectives on life, et cetera, et cetera. But after that brief 3 to 6 month period, those very qualities that attracted you to that other person, that are very different from your own, start to make you pretty bonkers. And we really start saying, what the hell is going on, How can that possibly happen? Or how can we, But, and that was a challenge. That was one of the first challenges we encountered in our relationship, is how do we deal with our differences? Mer's extroverted, I'm introspective. Mer's I'm very organized. Mer's very, what's the word?
Disorganized.
I don't want to say that. No, that has a negative connotation, and I don't say that. Spontaneous, let's use that term. And there are a number of other characteristics, but we quickly realized that if we were focusing on each other's differences, that we were doomed. So we began to realize that what worked for us was, instead of looking at these differences as ways of friction, we said, we didn't say this consciously, but we came to the conclusion that really need to look at them as being complementary to one another. And instead of being cause of friction to us. They in fact became a piece of strength to our relationship, so we could balance one another out. So we became more whole instead of just being one-sided or the other-sided. I think
we became a team.
Yeah.
We visioned ourselves as a team.
And the other piece that's really important when you're dealing with differences in a relationship is a sense of humor. Because clearly there are going to be situations where you either laugh or cry, literally. And so humor is really important. Mer and I are very different, as I said, introvert, extrovert. Now we can go on for hours telling you stories about that. And if we have some time at the end, I have a little story I happened to see on the internet today that I'll read to you. But for instance, typical scenario, I come home from work and Mer says to me, "How was your day?" I look at her and I'll say, "Fine," or "It was okay," If
it was really lousy, or whatever the answer.
If the roles were reversed, and I asked that of Mer, what I would get is probably, if not a full book, maybe a chapter in a book. It would just go on and on and on. Another area that we're different in, and I think some of this is a gender-based difference too, is how we respond to making mistakes. Mer freely admits that she makes mistakes. She has a lot of practice on it. But
no, it's so true. It's so true.
But true to my male gender, I would rather gargle shards of glass than admit that I made a mistake. But we know that, and we laugh about it, and it becomes a source of humor and ultimately strength to us. Another part of this is patience. You'll never be able to be with someone who has these differences unless you have patience. And sometimes it means patience waiting while she finds her car keys for the 6th time. But sometimes it just means patience in terms of working stuff through and understanding what's going on for each other in the relationship. We also are smart enough to know that you really can't change someone. If you go into a relationship and say I love almost everything about this person, but there are 3 or 4 things maybe crazy, but I'm going to change those as we get into the relationship. That's probably not going to happen. People's core personalities don't really change. That doesn't mean you can't grow in a relationship. Mary's become slightly more organized as we've gone on. I've become a little bit less introspective and maybe reach into my heart a little more than into my brain when I'm making decisions or pondering issues in life.
A little more.
What's that? A little bit, yeah. Well, but I think all of those characteristics are critically important to working in a relationship where there are different personalities. And I would think that if you went into a relationship where you were exactly the same, it would be terribly, terribly boring.
Absolutely. The second question, does my partner inspire me to be my best self? We talked a lot about this, and we said that we believe what makes us our best selves and what allows us to support and inspire the other person to be their best self is the fact that we share values. Our values are really, really critical to who we are as people. And because we share so many of the same values, it makes it really easy. We value our relationship. For those of you who know us, we work together, not in the same office anymore, but we see each other a lot at work. We go home, we spend time with each other, we're with each other on the weekends. Some people would say, "Oh my God, I'd pull my hair out, how can you do that?" And I would venture to say that both of us would say we really enjoy that. Our relationship is primary to us, and we give it a lot of the time and attention it deserves. I think we also value gratitude. I think we value faith. I think we value justice. There are many, many things that we value. Empathy. But I think we both really believe that for us, at least as a couple, I don't think we could have the relationship. I really believe we have a rock solid foundation, and I don't think that could be near as solid if we didn't have the shared values that we have.
Absolutely. The third question that we kind of unearthed through the internet in the wonderful world of Google was something that resonates to many of us here at BC. It was the issue of joy. Does your partner bring joy to your life? Many of you are familiar with Father Michael Himes talking about what brings you joy in terms of finding vocation. But I also think it's critically important that joy be part of a relationship. And also, as Michael Himes says, joy is not the same as happiness. Happiness, sometimes Mer doesn't make me happy, sometimes I don't make her happy. But I think in the core of our relationship, there is an undercurrent and essence of joy. And I think that really helps keep our relationship, and particularly helps us, because there are always going to be hard times in a relationship, there are going to be difficult times, external stresses, internal pressures, etc. But if you've got those shared values and that undercurrent of joy, I think it's going to help you get through, or has helped us get through some of the difficult times. I've been at BC for 34 years. It seems like forever, I'm sure, for many of you. I never thought I'd be here that long. And we're looking at retirement this year. And I think part of the reason we're looking at it in such a positive way, not that we're happy to leave here, because there are going to be lots of tears leaving here, but I think because we're so comfortable with one another, the idea of going off on our own together is like slipping into an old pair of jeans. And I think there are some people who are really afraid when it comes to retirement as to how am I going to spend all that time with my partner who I've never spent that much time with before. So we're fortunate in that regard. But the other thing I wanted to say is, I've been around Ignatian spirituality for 34 years, and a lot of it has sunk in. I fought some of it early on, but I really have grown to really embrace it and love it. And those of you, some of you who are here from one of my Courage to Know classes, I talk a lot about the 3 B's of Ignatian spirituality. Be attentive, be reflective, and be loving. And those, to me, have become really guiding principles of the way I think I try to live my life. And that influence of Ignatius of Loyola, in everything that he stands for, the churches stand for, has really become a part of me here at BC. Every day I try to be attentive to the world around me. I try to pay attention to people, things, and most importantly, I think, is I try not to take things for granted. I think too often we can become very blasé about what we have and the blessings that we've been given, and not really understanding and appreciate them. So, being attentive is really important for me. The reflection piece is obviously also important, and I'm not a journaler, or I don't meditate, but I do find the time, the snatches of time every day, hopefully, to really think about what my day has been like, how I've interacted with the world, and whether I've been the best that I could be in my relationship, in my professional life, etc. And really reflect also on that piece of gratitude, the gratitude that I'm so blessed to have Mer in my life, to be here at Boston College, but to have the things that we have here. Mer and I have both had a number of occasions to spend time in Nicaragua together, and that has always been one of the most valuable experiences for me, because it really brings me back down to earth to understand exactly how privileged we are here in our society. And then the last one is obviously to be loving, and that's something that is not always easy to do. And the type of work I've done over my career, I think it really does inform my work and who I am, because I think I go into situations with a sense of empathy and understanding and a sense of justice, and I think that that's one way of being loving and being able to do the kind of work that God intended me to do.
For me, God used to come to me. He still does. He came to me in this unusual way. I always think of things in images, and so this image that I have, that I carry around with me, is of, appropriately enough, that the Red Sox just started, is of a baseball team. And it's a baseball team made up of all deceased people. So it would be my baseball team of guardian angels. Now this team works 24/7. Is there such a thing as like 32/8? I don't know, but my guardian angels are always with me. And
they help her find her lost pocketbook, her lost keys,
well, that would
her
be
lost
St. Anthony.
sunglasses.
That would be St. Anthony. That would be Tony. Tony and I, St. Anthony. We're on a real first name basis. But anyway, this image of a baseball team where, you know, my grandparents are the owners, my dad's the manager. I had to bring this picture along. This is the mascot of my team, which is my dog Jessie, who passed away, our dog Jessie, who passed away years ago. But clearly this team made up of all these friends and family members who are deceased, but who are in the infield and the outfield and playing whatever position they need to be to get me through the day. And I've always heard these voices in my head, in my soul, when God is speaking to me through someone, through something. There was a time, and this is for another Agape Latte, but there was a time where in 1987, before Paul and I even met and were introduced, I came up, I was working full-time at BU. I had this very, very part-time job at BC. And Paul and I were in the same room together for a training. And Paul and I didn't meet. We didn't say hello. He was sitting on the edge of a table. I was across the room at another table. And this was when I was living with my boyfriend. And I happened to glance over at Paul, made no eye contact with him, mind you. And in my head, I heard a voice that said, "You're going to marry him." No joke. Ooh, I know. That's how they come to me. But, so like I said...
And I didn't know that, obviously.
And he didn't know that. So that's another story, like I said, for another Agape Latte. But nowadays, who is God for me as I approach my 58th birthday? God is becoming like a best friend. So when I think about the qualities that I look at in Paul, in my friends, Paula, the qualities of dependability, the qualities of being there to listen when you really need to talk, of having my back when I don't feel like someone might, qualities of accepting me for who I am and not judging me, and a really big one of forgiving me when I muck up. Those are the qualities that I think my relationship has become with God. And so as we go into this journey together, I think we're going to be real good. Because as Paul said, I think we've got it down in terms of spending time with each other. We've got it down in terms of our values, and those values are going to create our communities. And God is walking with us. So,
you know, how many of you are seniors here? Okay, so a number of you are in the same position we are. You're leaving BC. Some of you, most of you after 4 years, us after a combined 60 years. And it is scary. I mean, we're experiencing probably similar kinds of feelings that you are. We're leaving the BC bubble. And BC has been our home and our community for a number of years. But I think the fact that we are informed by our faith, that we share the values that we share, is going to make it much easier for us to travel forward down the path that the future holds for us. And we're not even sure what that is. I mean, we have some general plans, but you know, a lot of it's still to unfold. So it's our core values and our faith that are going to travel with us and walk with us and help us as we move forward in this. You know, our communities, whatever they may be, we're moving from the BC community to a new community, whatever that may be. And I think we're going to be able to hold true to our values in that community. And if we can do that, then I think we're going to be fine. What I'd like to do is close with a quote that I think is really relevant, certainly for us, certainly for the seniors in this room, but just about anyone else here, whoever has to face a decision or a point in their lives where they have to make some kind of judgment determination. And it's very short. It's from a poem by a French poet named Apollinaire. It says, very simply, "Come to the edge," he said. "No," they said, "we are afraid." "Come to the edge," he said. They came, he pushed them, and they flew.
So that is our presentation for this evening. Thank you so much.